What's good with it? You already know what this is right now. CGT Podcast 4. I think I don't want to lose track of the numbers. I'm just going to say CGT Podcast, man. This one right here is really stressful for me to even do, honestly. Because I got to say something. I got to do a precursor before I even start this video or the podcast right now. And I want y'all to actually try to hear me out. With that being said, people are fucking sleep, bro. And that shit literally be making me want to cry. Like, when I go out in the world, it makes me want to cry a lot of the times because people are so sleep. And sometimes it's just hard being woken up early. It's stressful. Like, that shit's stressful, nigga. Like, I literally, like, when I first started working on this podcast, I thought I was going to be able to do this shit. You feel me? Cool, breezy, easy, not stressing myself out of shit. But just having so much information, having so many people in powerful places who I respect, who have been on this planet longer than me, who've been working harder than me on this conscious shit, and they don't even ask for shit like half of these people on YouTube and all this other shit do. They just go to work and fucking work, and then they do what they do out the kindness of their heart. They spread information out the kindness of their heart. Not to say there's nothing wrong with asking for money. Anyway, these people, whether they white, black, Indian, I don't give a fuck what they are. You have to respect these people. You have to, man. And the reason I'm saying that is because of this. People don't, a lot of these people who in this conspiracy theory shit or even in the conscious community, I'm going to be real with you, they're fucking dead on the inside. They don't have any motivation for life. If a lot of people, once they got off that Jesus boat or that religious boat, they lost all their morality. They lost all their confidence in themselves. They lost their ability to have faith in something greater than themselves, including a group of people coming together to expose the truth, right? So we gotta take our patience when it comes to like taking information in from other people who are not CGT podcasts. Because of the simple fact that a lot of people don't study fucking history. And if you do study history, and if you conscious you study history, I bet most of the history you study is nothing but like shit where it's like, oh yeah, the Tartarians or the fucking Egyptians or the somebody in history in which is some shit that it doesn't even relate to the time we living in right now, beyond the fact that the people who fucking was in control and then they left behind the fucking blueprints to control your ass now. With new updates and shit, of course. But we got to understand this. History is important. You are not all from fucking Africa. Why do I have to say that? Because of the fact that now that everybody's realizing they not from fucking Africa, why the fuck are we still going so hard studying African history and all this other history in the fucking world when we don't even understand what happened here 100 years ago, 200 years ago? You get what I'm saying? How you gonna skip the shit that's actually more relevant to your time and go back to some shit where you don't even relate to it culturally? You don't want to relate to it culturally because that shit is played out. It's played out. And the reason why these civilizations fail is the same reason why this one gonna fall. It's because people don't want to hear the fucking truth. So with that being said, I'm getting stressed out already, bro. That was just the precursor. And I gotta do a little bit more precursor, so I'm gonna spark this blunt up a little bit and then break it down the best way I can. Don't tell me I ain't got no goddamn flame in this bit. There we go. Break it down. Now, I ain't even gonna, this probably gonna be the only video I smoke on because this shit is too stressful for me to even do without smoking a blunt. And I don't even like smoking that much no more. I like dropping. Anyway, I got a list of about 8 videos I want to share with y'all, right? And the inspiration behind these videos and the inspiration behind this episode is going to be called Racism and the Federal Reserve Bank. Racism and Reserves. That's what I'm going to name this episode. Racism and Reserves. Because you motherfuckers still don't understand something. There's so many people out there right now who are part of this goddamn movement where it's like, oh yeah, black people don't just want to be Democrats no more. I understand. I respect that. it's a step forward in a positive position. But to completely ignore the actual enemy and try to make it seem like the only fucking enemy is a party, we going down the wrong path again. We heading down the wrong path again. Well, y'all heading down the wrong path again. I ain't even gonna put myself on the same boat, nigga. Y'all in a little boat. I'm in a fucking spaceship hovercraft. I'm in a fucking electromagnetic goddamn hovercraft. And I'm not even worried about y'all niggas on boats no more. I'm just trying to goddamn wake y'all bitch ass up and goddamn beam y'all up with my light ray. My light rays. So all these people out there getting lost in Democrat, Republican, rich, poor, fucking religion, non-religion, you don't even understand. You really don't. You really think you're choosing a side of good and fighting for it on your own beliefs. But by the end of this video, my goal is to help you see that you are you being led, you're a sheep. Sadly. And that's not something bad. When I say you're a sheep, that's me making you a lion, nigga. That's me making you a fucking wolf. That's me making you a solar deity if you want to be that shit. Or whatever animalistic nature that you want to be. Because in my opinion, planets are animals. But anyway. We're going to hop into this video. We're going to hop into the podcast now. This podcast episode is going to be called Race and Reserves. Race and Reserves. Now I'm going to break it down for you. Since the beginning of America, right? Where we call this land America. Since they started getting independence from the Britain and shit like that, you know, when they declared themselves to be independent, Declaration of Independence. Since this time, there has been something more fucking devastating to the whole fucking world than racism, religion, fucking any of that shit. And it is simply the New World Order that you have become to know it as so. It's called the New World Order. Why is that important? Because these motherfuckers just gonna come over here randomly and then start a fucking country. That wasn't just what happened. It was actually a time where people realize they do not have to be loyal to a fucking government. They do not have to be loyal to a religion. And why is that important? Because the fucking the Scottish Rite Masons that came over here on the eastern border of the United States, right? They established their own society and they made themselves independent of the monarchy in Britain. The monarchy in Britain is based off of fucking the Catholic. Okay, they go back and forth. Don't get me wrong. The monarchy in Britain is based off of the Anglo-Saxons, which is a form of Christianity, and the Catholic Church, which is a form of what they call a fake form. Both of them, both form the same shit. It's just one of them is more ancient than the other one. That's the only difference. So the Masons over in Britain, they got tired of all this shit. They got tired of having to goddamn bow down to the Jesuits and shit when they know that the Jesuits ain't doing shit but using the same shit they know how to do. And then trying to make it seem like they criminals. So they came over here, they was like, this is a new world order. The new world order was to fucking run a society based on numbers. Run a society based on numbers. We're still in the process to getting there 100%. Don't get me wrong, but we there 98% right now. And with that being said, that's where the story has to begin. Because after that shit happened, we had a whole bunch of wars, whole bunch of expansion, United States, right? And the reason why we had so much expansion and we had a bunch of wars and shit was because these people who had moved over here to this fucking land and conquering the land and decided to break away from the original country that they actually fucking hated, they needed resources in order to compete with the rest of the fucking world. They needed resources in order to make their numerical system have value. So they went to work on that shit over time. That's what they started doing, collecting gold. Now, at that point in time, gold was the standard for fucking money, right? And they like, hold on now. It's all this fucking gold on the West Coast. It's all this gold throughout the United States. And you think we ain't about to goddamn take advantage of that shit? So you had hardworking men and women of all cultures, all races, going hard as fuck, getting this gold, collecting the gold, goddamn becoming rich as fuck. And then the government, right? The government at that time, around that time, they was like, oh shit, y'all need to get on this gold. This is so good. We about to goddamn literally make a system where the government has to touch that gold at some point in time, nigga. Has to. Matter of fact, they made it to where the government literally was the regulator of the fucking gold. And that's where you get, that's not where central banking itself started at, but in America, around this time is where central banking started. You had a whole bunch of people who were becoming rich overnight just by going to get gold and shit. And they were putting their fucking gold inside of banks. These are independent banks, right? Some of them were fucking, you feel me? Most of the banks back around that time were owned by the people who own land and shit like that. Now, this is where I'm gonna dive into the first video, which is gonna explain to you how we got to where we are today. Because at first I was gonna name this video, How Did We Get Here? But I decided to just make it more relatable. So this is a lady called, wait, never mind. It's two things I'm gonna share with y'all. Because this is where we lost at. We getting lost right now in this party system. And you don't even fucking realize that a lot of people talk about the Republicans, they fought for slavery and all this shit, Abraham Lincoln, around 200 years ago. Right? So this is where we're getting lost at in this period of time of where, you feel me, slavery was so-called, you feel me, ended. And then you have the Republican Party responsible for that. Now let's look at this shit. Now let's look at this shit real close. We got the Democratic Party, which is known for oligarchy, which we're gonna get into this shit. They believe that oligarchy was supposed to be the dominant fucking government in the United States. Now I'm gonna show, when I show you the video about the different types of government, including oligarchies, you're gonna see how that differs from republic. I'm a Republican, right? A republic. But with that being said, the party that was responsible for what we consider to be republic ideas were the Whigs. And the Whigs were fucking, I mean, don't get me wrong, both sides were fucking Masons of different rights. But the Whigs were fucking York Rite Masons and shit like that. Along with the Jesuits, along with the goddamn shit like that. So over time, you got to start realizing that the Whigs got put out of power the same way that the Democrats getting put out of power right now. And then that gave birth to a whole new fucking political party called the Republican Party, right? Republican Party was like the complete opposite of the Democratic Party back then. Yes. But that was intentionally. That was intentionally. Because Abraham Lincoln, the most important thing he did was not for the 13th Amendment. No. One of the most important things he tried to just do was implement our own fucking currency. Based off of the gold that we have here, based off the gold that the people have here. And the people who worked hard, who became nothing and they were nothing and they became rich overnight just by fucking working hard and going hard as fucking America and finding gold and building infrastructure and building railroads and shit like that. These people came up. You feel me? And then you got other people who were coming up in lazy ways by forcing slaves to do the same shit. And then trying to make it seem like they're just as intelligent, they're just as hardworking and all this other shit. So that's where you get the Democrat-Republican shit at. But the most important thing that the Democrats and Republicans disagreed on at that point in time was a central bank. A central bank. So that's the most important shit. That's why they killed fucking Abraham Lincoln. They didn't have shit to do with black people. Now let's remember this. This is important. So if we think about that, we can't even say that Republicans, you feel me, are responsible for freeing slaves and shit like that. Because of the fact that, in reality, that's not even what, they didn't give a fuck about the slaves. What they gave a fuck about was, this nigga tried to goddamn implement our own independent currency from the fucking rest of the world. You feel me? So that we can goddamn so that we can actually regulate our own country without outside influences doing it behind the scenes, and then making all the problems seem like it's some Democrat or Republican type shit. This is what they established later on after they killed Abraham Lincoln, and they goddamn did the whole Reconstruction shit. During these times, the shit got more racist than it ever was before. You feel me? And this is because of the fact that white people at that time wasn't giving a fuck about black people. Black people wasn't giving a fuck. All these people who were free, they were giving a fuck about making sure that the Central Reserve Bank doesn't come back. You feel me? And then as time goes on, that gave people opportunities. Black, white, Indian, goddamn Chinese, anybody. It gave people opportunities. You feel me? Where the opportunity wasn't controlled and manipulated by a man or a woman or some shit like that, or a corporation. It was an opportunity offered by the whole nation that will make the whole thing better. In theory, that is. But you feel me? As Reconstruction went on, you had more racist shit happen. You had racism like grow to a greater height than ever, and that's where I'm gonna goddamn pop this video off for you right here. Her name is Heather Cox Richardson. She's a very respected historian. She has a book out that is talking about the very things that I was just, you feel me, explaining to you. So,
welcome back to American History Chat on Thursdays at 1 o'clock. Today I'm going to carry on where I left off last week with the history of the Republican Party. And, you know, I keep joking about how this is my favorite material every single week. This is my favorite material. And I think maybe I mean this for real this week, but probably, no, actually next week's Reconstruction. Anyway, I really love this stuff today. And I want to get right to it. Let me first do my usual disclaimer. My name is Heather Cox Richardson. I am a professor of history, and I do not speak for my employer when I do these live videos. All right, so where I left you on last week was on the ideology behind the Republican Party and how it forms in the 1850s in response to the fear that an oligarchy is taking over the American system of democracy, and how that inspires men like Abraham Lincoln, but also all of the people who made up the early Republican Party to push back against what they considered the slave power, this oligarchic group of a very small number of large slave owners, people who owned more than 25 or 50 enslaved people, and who were trying to dominate American society, and how it pushed them to push back against that, and to come up with an ideology, a different kind of ideology for the way the government should work. And what they argued was that the government, rather than protecting property, which of course is central in the Constitution, should be defending the principles in the Constitution, which is to promote equality of opportunity. And as you know, the theme behind this series is the tension in American history between, on the one hand, the equality of opportunity that's promised in the Declaration of Independence, and on the other hand, the protection of property that's in the Constitution. And once again, just a little bit of a caveat. In my previous series, I talked about all the limitations, important limitations of the idea of equality of opportunity, and what life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness actually meant to the founders, and what it's meant to Americans since then. I'm not going to talk about this time. I'm really just talking about the tensions here between equality of opportunity on the one hand and protection of property on the other.
That's key right there. She emphasizes that, and that's very key. I'm gonna rewind that a little bit if I don't want to go back too far though.
to promote equality of opportunity. And as you know, the theme behind this
Protection of
series
property
is the
versus
tension in
equality
American history
opportunity.
between, on the
Keep
one
that in
hand,
mind.
the equality of opportunity that's promised in the Declaration of Independence, and on the other hand, the protection of property that's in the Constitution.
Now,
And once again, just
listen
a
to
little
that
bit of
part,
a
please.
caveat. In my previous series, I talked about all the limitations, important limitations of the idea of equality of opportunity, and what life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness actually meant to the founders, and what it's meant to Americans since then. I'm not going to talk about this time. I'm really just talking about the tensions here between equality of opportunity on the one hand and protection of property on the other. So anyway, the Republican Party comes up with this idea, first of all, that the oligarchs must not be allowed to take over the American democratic system, small d democratic system. And finally, in 1859, Abraham Lincoln articulates a new vision for a new political party. So the party had been around since it's really formed in 54, but it takes on a concrete identity by 1856, but it doesn't really stand for anything. It stands against a lot of stuff. And after Lincoln...
Hear that part. Hear that part. That stands to this day. They're not really for anything. They're just against a lot of shit. Can you tell me one thing the Republicans are for besides the protection of property? Which basically could easily go back to meaning slavery. If you calculate how the system is ran right now with the straw man and what you represent in this country, or some people represent in this country, if we keep allowing that mind state to be used, or if that ideology isn't addressed in a actual way, then it's going it could easily lead back to that, with the idea of protection of property being dominant in the fucking United States, just because the Republican Party, when they come into power, the Republican Party represents the protection of rights. When Democrats come into power, they represent the equality of opportunity. But that plight itself disintegrated the second that the Federal Reserve Bank was put into power. Was given its whatever it became, was given the leeway to become what it became today. And we're going to address that.
Speech in 1859, it really starts to stand for something. And standing for something is the idea that the government should respond to the people at the bottom, that it should bring opportunity and equality of access to resources to people at the bottom, because that's where the true innovation happened. That's where wealth was created, as people applied their labor to raw materials. And that's how they were sort of the engine room of society. That's how you move society forward. So they have this ideology, and Abraham Lincoln is the presidential candidate in 1860. He runs for office, and he wins. He wins with a plurality of the vote. He does not win a majority. He wins slightly under 40% of the vote. And even before he takes office, because in the 19th century, the election's in November, but the president doesn't take the oath of office until early March. Even before he takes office, Southern Democrats who adhere to this idea that really they should be the ones in charge of the government take their marbles and go home. They simply say, if you're going to elect somebody like this, we don't want to be part of this union any longer. And that's actually a really interesting moment, because in many of the deep southern states, they don't actually ever even hold congressional elections. So if they had done that, if they had done so, it's entirely likely that the Democrats would have retained control of Congress, and nothing that I'm going to tell you about today would have happened. And the reason that I love this material so much today
I'm gonna go 5
is
minutes
because
in.
it's really the foundation for absolutely everything that has happened ever since. And a lot of it is brand new to a lot of people. And I think if you're listening, it will help you understand high school history a lot better, because a lot of what happens in the late 19th century, and people are talking about the greenbackers and the cross of gold and all that stuff, and you were like, what are they fighting about? Like, who are the Silverites? All those roots are right here, and they make total sense when they're in the Civil War. And just so you know, when you watch it happening, and just so you know, the reason I get all excited about this stuff is this was actually the subject of my first book. It was called The Greatest Nation of the Earth, Republican Economic Policies During the American Civil War. And I'm not giving you the title with any encouragement to buy the book. It is now available only print on demand, and it's like $1 gazillion. So So don't even think about it. I'll tell you everything that's in it, and it's synopsized in a lot of my later books. But the reason I mention that is because when you're writing a dissertation, you get to just really live your subject. And I really lived my subject, which, if anybody knows me, knows is a huge, like my advisor just thought it was hilariously funny, because I am, I don't do numbers very well.
I fuck with her. Y'all gotta go watch that series called A History of the Republican Party. Please watch the whole thing. Don't just watch the beginning, because that's how you get lost in what's happening today, in today's world. So I'm gonna break down to you the different types of government. Now, the type of government can make a difference in the reality that you live in the matrix, in the algorithm. But the word government alone means slavery, nigga. It means slavery for somebody. It means slavery for somebody. It means slavery for somebody in that fucking society. And it's not by choice, nigga. It's not because they not working hard enough. It's not because they fucking lazy. It's not because they stupid. It means slavery for a group of people. Because that's what government means. You're governing somebody's mentality. That's well known. You can hear a million people saying that shit all over the place now. So it's not just me. It's not just conspiracy theories. It's a very well known fact that government was literally the reason why government was created, how it works, and the different types. This is shit that people who love history, who love politics, they actually study this stuff, and they're using it against you. Because in school, you probably didn't give a fuck about history. You didn't give a fuck about politics. You didn't give a fuck about, you feel me, social studies. And you didn't give a fuck about shit like that. So you don't even know how to put the history into context. You feel me? Because the education systems in the inner cities are so fucking terrible that if you literally, you feel me, have a terrible diet and you go into school and you try to learn some shit or some shit like that, it can literally influence the way you see shit. Like, you can literally go to school and see that Columbus discovered America and shit like that. And then your parents wouldn't even they know, like we know we was taught that shit. Why didn't they address that? Why do we actually have to take a test on that? It's because of government. Now, the type of government is important, but that's just because if you study that shit, it can give you the power to actually fucking, you feel me, determine your own destiny. You can create your own government where it's an individualistic government, in which they call, their code word for that might be, they call that shit different shit. I ain't even gonna address why they call it that. I'm not even gonna call it what they call it. It's just people having their own individual government without there being a dominant or even a fucking controlled algorithm. There has to be 100% natural algorithm that nature allowed and created itself. Now, the government...
When Benjamin Franklin exited the Constitutional Convention, he was asked by a woman, "Sir, what have you given us?" His immediate response was, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." Yet most Americans
What? Nigga, check your...
today have been persuaded that our nation's governmental system is
Check this shit out.
"If you can keep it." Response was, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." Yet most Americans today have been persuaded that our nation's governmental system is a democracy.
All these Republicans, all these Democracies, and all these Democrats and Republicans and shit, and the Green Party, y'all gotta understand this is all mocking you. These are different stages of the American progress, that we actually probably had freedom at these different stages, and over time, they ate that shit up. They ate that shit up with their algorithm, because they literally feed off of chaos. And at that time, we weren't disciplined enough to understand that. The world didn't have the information that we have now. But today, in this time, we have this information, and we have the facts about all the governments in the world and how they operate, down to the economies, down to the religions, down to the fucking, you feel me, cost of livings, the life, bruh, down to the fucking everyday thing that you couldn't even notice, bro. They have information about this. And you're telling me that over time, these parties are fucking fighting each other. Why are they fighting each other? It's because of the fact that the people who started this country, they knew for a fact that when they started this shit, it wasn't gonna fucking last long. It was only for them to prosper in their lifetime. And that's how these people who run the system think. That's how these people who are in these secret societies have been trained to think. And that's how this power and this system and the progress of what they call the New World Order, it's already established. You already here, nigga. It's too late. But the whole point is, it's too late. It's too late for you to try to stop that shit from being established. But once it's established, that makes it easy for it to tear down when you got a mind. You get what I'm saying? Once something is established, it's actually easier to tear down. Once something is in a process of being made, and it actually has a fucking soul or intelligence or a conscience, the more you test this shit while it's actually in the progress is growing till its actual full capacity, it's the stronger, more agile, more flexible, all that shit's gonna get. But since these motherfuckers are established now and we got so much information on them, we have to realize what's happening right now. Let me play it.
Response was, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." Yet most Americans today have been persuaded that our nation's governmental system is a democracy and not a republic. The difference between these two is essential in understanding Americanism and the American system. Before we discuss political systems, however, it's helpful to address the confusion that has been spread about the political spectrum. Many have been led to believe that the political spectrum places groups such as communists on the far left, fascists or dictators on the far right, and political moderates or centrists in the middle. However, a more accurate political spectrum will show government having zero power on the far right to having 100% power on the far left. At the extreme right, there is no government. The extreme left features total government under such labels as communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, princes, potentates, dictators, kings, any form of total government. Those who claim that Nazis and fascists are right-wing never define their terms. This amounts to spreading confusion. Toward the middle of the political spectrum can be found the type of government limited to its proper role of protecting the rights of the people. That's where the Constitution of the United States is. Those who advocate such a form of government are really constitutional moderates. So let's analyze the basic forms of government. They are monarchy or dictatorship ruled by one, oligarchy ruled by a few, democracy ruled by a majority, republic ruled by law, and anarchy, which is ruled by no one. In discussing these five, we'll see that they can be narrowed
Why
down.
does anarchy always have to represent chaos, though? That's how you know it's an illusion, bro. That's how you know it's an illusion, bro. You cannot believe them when they made up this word anarchy. You get what I'm saying? You can't believe that shit. You can't. You feel me? Matter of fact, let me look up what the word archy means. Because that's an archy. Definition. Archy is a combining for the word of rule or government. Okay, now let's look up what anarchy means. A state of disorder. Let's see what that word. Well, let's see when that word's created according to Google at least, because they're gonna fucking tell a lie most likely. They're talking about that shit was created in the 1800s. Okay, 1800s. I wonder why. This word was created in the 1800s when we've known that tribal lifestyle has been what they call what would be described under they shit, which would be no law. That's tribal. So you telling me this shit, tribal lifestyle has been around for millions of years. Even animals, bugs, live under no government. Very few animals, very few bugs live under a fucking government or some type like of fucking government, basically a law. But once we understand that this is a psyops, that in the matrix you're being plugged into your brain that if you don't have a government, they'll give you 1 trillion types of government, but the only one that will be chaotic, or the only one that they will show you is openly chaotic and not just people in suits smiling or a man Let me show y'all this shit, man. Let me just show y'all this shit. So, this right here is monarchy. This is the representation. It's like a nigga standing up facing the sun. And then you got oligarchy, which is a group of people ruling, a small group of people ruling. And then democracy is a large group of people ruling. And then republic is the law ruling. And then it's like the balance. Oh, that represents balance in Mayot, the law. And then you got this pillar right here. You feel me? But then when you get to anarchy, you see a fist up in the air, a white fist at that. And you see a whole bunch of smoke in the air in the background, like a fucking bomb went off. See, that's how, bro. You gotta be aware of shit like that, bro. You gotta reverse. They put shit in reverse because they want to control you and they want government.
To even fewer. Looking first at monarchy or dictatorship, this form of government doesn't really exist in the practical sense. It's always a group that puts one of its members up front. A king has his council of nobles or earls, and every dictator has his bureaucrats or commissars, the men behind the scenes. This isn't ruled by one, even though one person may be the visible leader. It's ruled by a group. So let's eliminate monarchy, dictatorship, because it never truly exists. Oligarchy, which is ruled by a group.
See? That was key. They just broke down to you some real shit. There is no such thing as a fucking dictatorship. There's no such thing as a monarchy. Those are all illusions based off of fear mongering put in your head to make you have this demonized character in your life, or this Luciferian character in your reality. There is no such thing as a fucking king, queen, emperor, none of that shit. All that shit is just fucking. It's really just goddamn. It's like being an overseer or some shit like that. It's like, oh yeah, shit, I'm still a slave, but I got me a horse. That's why they eliminated that shit. So once you are conscious and you eliminate the idea completely of there being a devil or one person who's responsible for something, then you already are closer to actually being free and actually being more disciplined and actually, you feel me, exposing the truth to the world and to yourself. To yourself and to the world. And then last but not least, causing as an effect of your light, darkness to fucking bitch out and scribble up and disappear.
Is the most common form of government in all history. And it is the most common form of government today. Most of the nations of the world are ruled by a powerful few, and therefore oligarchy remains. At the other end, we find anarchy, which means without government. Some people have looked over history and found that many of its worst crimes were committed by governments. So they decided that having no government might be a good idea. But this is a mistake.
Has rarely been practiced in reality.
Because as the ancient Greeks stated, without law there can be no freedom. Our founding fathers agreed and helped.
Nigga, that's like me going to my grandma and I knock on the door. My grandma hate coming to the door. I knock on my grandma's door and she comes to the door. She be like, "Where your keys at, boy? You know I don't feel like coming down these steps to open no door." I'm like, "Grandma, I'm sorry. I left my keys at the door most of the time." But that's them saying the Greeks, which is a fake ass civilization that never really existed. It's just an extension of a fucking, you feel me, a Mediterranean superpower that y'all don't even know existed. Without law, there can be no freedom. That's like me telling my fucking grandma, yeah, without the door, there can be no key. Nigga, duh. The idea of law is the idea of the fucking door, nigga. And my fucking freedom is the key. That's what it is, nigga. My freedom, nigga. I have the freedom to do shit. The government is trying to block that freedom. And what's inside of that government house, nigga, I don't want that shit. Why would you telling me in your government that without law, there can be no freedom. That's insane, bro. That's not good, nigga. There's a billion other type of fucking civilizations in nature, including galactically. And you telling me that and yours, y'all can't even guarantee that I'm gonna be free if y'all don't have laws to goddamn discipline y'all fucking people. That means I don't want to be there. My sanity is more important than your fucking, you trying to goddamn change your society and shit and trying to make it seem like, oh yeah, shit, that's for everybody, nigga. Everybody in the world, you gotta realize it's fucking chaotic if we ain't out here controlling shit. You got me.
Well, that some amount of government is a necessary force in any civilized, orderly society. In a state of anarchy, however, everyone has to guard life, liberty, and property, and the lives of family members. Everyone must be armed, and movement is severely restricted because one's property has to be protected at all times. Civilized people have...
Do you know why? You know why one's property had to be protected at all times? Because of the fact that the system that we live in, it hasn't given equal opportunities to people. All the systems and religions and communities and all the shit is ran by central banks of some sort on running algorithms to control their people because it's the new world order. That's how you're gonna do that shit. So you sitting right here telling me that these people literally have to go rob somebody else and take their property and do some damage to them, not because they hate them or some shit like that. The only reason they would hate them is that the fucking level of education in that area has led them to hate them. Or if they goddamn deserve to be hated. And that's something that they have to settle out themselves. But with that being said, the way that they settle that out was not always fucking going to bomb people and fucking shoot people. You gotta realize that. It wasn't always, you about to have an arrow war. We're just crazy stone cold warriors and shit like that. No, that's a last resort type shit. And that used to be a last resort before money was involved. You feel me? Or the idea of central algorithms and central banks being involved. So don't believe this. You have to actually do your own research when it comes to civilizations that live without a central government. That thrive without a central government.
Always hired someone to do the guarding, a sheriff, a police force, or some branch of government. Once law enforcement was in place, the people were freer. They could leave their property, work in the fields, and so on. In short, the proper amount of government makes everyone freer. There are some who advocate anarchy, however, not because they want no government, but because they don't like what they have. They use anarchy as a tool for revolutionary change.
That's
the
what
condition of
that
anarchy
word even means in the
very
first
much
place.
like
That's
a vacuum
the only thing that word
rushes
means.
in to fill it.
That means that
These
somebody
calculating
using the
anarchists work
idea
to
of
break
not
down
having
the
no
existing
government in
government
order
with
to
riot and
initiate
killing,
a
looting,
change
and
in
terrorism.
government. That's what that word
Tragically, the
means.
people living in such chaos often go to those best able to put an end to it and beg them to take over and restore order.
Goes back to that
And who is
alien
best
dialect
able to
shit.
put an end to the chaos? The very people who started it. The anarchists who created the problem then create a government run by them, an oligarchy, where they have total power. This is exactly what happened in Russia that led to Lenin taking total power, and in Germany where Hitler's brown shirts created the chaos that brought him to power.
Got me fucked up.
But anarchy isn't a stable form of government. It's a quick transition from something that exists to something desired by the power-hungry. It's a temporary condition, and because it isn't permanent, we eliminate it as well. The word democracy comes from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratein, meaning to rule.
So
Democracy, therefore, means the rule of the people, majority rule. This, of course, sounds good, but suppose the majority decides to take away one's home, or business, or children. Obviously, there has to be a limit. The flaw in democracy is that the majority isn't restrained. If more than half the people can be persuaded to want something in a democracy, they rule. What about republic? Well, that comes from the Latin, res meaning thing, and publica meaning public. It means the public thing, the law. A true republic is one where the government is limited by law, leaving the people alone. America's founders had a clean slate to write on. They could have set up an oligarchy. In fact, there were some who wanted George Washington to be their king.
They didn't.
But the
They
founding
didn't set up an
fathers knew
oligarchy,
history,
nigga. Come on,
and they
bro.
chose to give us the rule of
Y'all
law
sick,
in a
bro.
republic, not the rule of
Y'all
a
are
majority
fucking
in a
sick,
democracy.
bro.
Why? Let's demonstrate the difference in the setting
Y'all
of the Old
fighting
West.
over different white, black, all the people. I want
Consider
y'all
a
to
lynch
know
mob in a
y'all are
democracy.
fucking slaves,
35
bro.
horseback riders
You're
chase
fighting
one lone
over.
gunman. They catch him.
You're
And they vote
fighting
35 to 1
over
to hang
different
him.
ways for your slaves
Democracy has
to
triumphed.
make you do what they
And there's
want
one
you to
less gunman
fucking
to
do,
contend with.
nigga.
Now
And they give
consider
you
the
a
same
little
scenario in a
room
republic.
opportunity.
The 35 horseback riders
Little
catch
room
the
for
gunman
leeway.
and vote 35 to 1 to hang him. But the sheriff arrives, and he says, "You can't kill him. He's got his right to a fair
And do
trial."
not. I
So
dare
they
you
take
to
the
stop.
gunman back to
I
town.
dare you to stop,
A
nigga.
jury of his peers is selected,
You're not a
and they
slave.
hear
Stop.
the evidence and the defense,
Stop doing
and they
everything
decide if he
that
shall
your heart
hang.
is telling you is wrong
Does
right
the
now.
jury even decide by majority rule?
And if you not,
No,
you can't do
it has
that.
to
You're
be
a slave.
unanimous, or he goes free. The rights of the gunman aren't subject to majority rule, but to the law. This is the essence of a republic.
All right, that's all. That's all for that one. That shit almost about to piss me off all over again. I'm about to close that shit out. Y'all heard. Y'all got what y'all needed to hear from that. So now we going to
Now,
a period of time where, you feel me, we're not just talking about governments no more. The government has been established at this point. We have two main eras in the American we have two main eras in the American, you feel me, tides. When we have like rises, and we have falls and shit. And the peak of one of them was the fucking Republic, where motherfuckers was like, yeah, like it was like the Whigs, nigga. This was basically the Whigs. Niggas who like, shit, we stand for protection of goddamn property, because of the fact that at that time, you feel me, they had to goddamn protect the shit that they was stealing. You feel me? So they was like, oh yeah, shit, y'all go out there and work hard as fuck. We gonna let y'all keep the shit y'all got. And then goddamn, over time, we gonna goddamn ask y'all to goddamn pay taxes and shit like that. That ain't nothing. So that'll maintain the balance of us protecting your rights and your property. They're like, okay, that sounds like a good ass deal. And then over time, that shit failed. You feel me? Because of the fact that shit got out of control. Because the idea of property is, all these law, the idea of government and the idea of government in general is based off of law. You feel me? Of some sort. Now, with that being said, the laws it's up to the public to abide by the laws or not, you feel me? And once that happens, shit, these fucking terms and laws and shit like that is all spells. So I could write down something and it can mean a million different things, and somebody can use that loosely, and based off of the judge is going to determine, you feel me, how she's using it, and then you have to goddamn trying to vibe to that shit. With that being said, the judge is different judges who see it in different ways, in different states and different areas and shit like that. So over time, and you feel me, since the South was like, fuck that shit, we don't gotta abide by that shit no more. We've literally made a whole different society inside a republic, and we gonna call that shit a democracy, because, you feel me, the majority rules. We don't want the government rule. We don't want just, you feel me, a whole bunch. We abide by what the fuck we believe in, basically. You said that we could do what the fuck we want to do. Okay, we gonna tell you that we want to have slaves. We believe that this is property in our states and shit like that. So over time, that's where that shit started to define itself in different parts of the country, and then that's where you have the rise of democracy. You feel me? This idea that, you feel me, the government or certain people should be in control of the government, and the people who should be in control of the government are the people who are the richest. You feel me? And the most smartest. Now that you've had these two ideas battling each other over time, it came to a threshold point to where, you feel me, in 1913, you already know what happened. Popped off the goddamn Federal Reserve. Now I gotta play a little information about that, so y'all won't think I'm just bullshitting on how important this is. You feel me? Which one is it? Which one is it? How do I feel? Owns it? Okay. Okay, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna start off right here.
The cornerstone of the American economy. For just over a century, the Fed has overseen
Right here
the
is business
financial
casual.
system of the
Go follow
U.S.,
them. Go
but its
subscribe,
track
please.
record has been far from perfect. Worse yet, it has such a unique and convoluted structure that it's very difficult for people to really understand it, which is why, unsurprisingly, the Fed has been subject to various conspiracy theories, from being owned by the Rothschilds to being operated by lizard people. Today, we're going back to the dawn of American finance to see how the Fed was created, how it works, and who really owns it. This video
It's
is brought
business
to you by
casual,
Skillshare, where you
by the
can
way.
find a ton of different classes, including my own series of videos on how the stock market works. You can watch them for free by registering with the link in the description. America during the late 19th century was a nation in turmoil, and not just in the literal sense. The Civil War was no doubt devastating, but even during the peace that followed, America was plagued by frequent and deep economic depressions. The underlying cause was simple. America just lacked a proper financial system, and more importantly, it didn't have a central bank to save the day when things turned bad. Now keep in mind, central banking wasn't a new concept. The Dutch were the first to come up with a central bank in 1609, and it was instrumental in transforming the Netherlands from a swampy backwater into a global economic empire. Following the example of the Dutch, the English created the Bank of England in 1694, which of course became the backbone of the British Empire. But it's exactly this association with the British that made the Founding Fathers reluctant to use the same model in the United States. There were two attempts at establishing a central bank even despite public opposition. Alexander Hamilton himself led the first movement in 1791. But in both cases, the systems lasted under 20 years and did little to stabilize the situation. And by all accounts, the situation was very, very bad.
They still
Then even a
fucking
single
doing little
local
to
bank
stabilize the
failing
situation right
could
now,
result
these days.
in nationwide panics. People knew that no one could save their bank if it went bust, so as soon as rumors of insolvency started spreading, everyone frantically started withdrawing whatever they had, bankrupting otherwise healthy and solvent banks simply out of fear. Such bank runs happened with frightening regularity, and the depressions that followed were long and painful. Of course, American bankers realized very well just how bad their industry was doing. Paul Warburg, one of the great American bankers of his day, said in 1907 that the American banking system then was at about the same point as 15th century Italy or Babylon in 2000 BC. Just a few months after Warburg made that statement, the country suffered the Panic of 1907, and it was particularly severe. To start things off, in 1906, a devastating earthquake destroyed 80% of San Francisco. With reconstruction efforts underway, capital was very tight, and because all the money back then was in paper form, it was much more difficult to reallocate it across the country. One banker tried to abuse that by manipulating the stock price of the United Copper Company back on Wall Street. He hoped to see the shares rise exponentially in value, but instead they crashed, dragging down the entire stock market with them. That banker was involved in 10 different banks across the East Coast, and one after another, these banks failed as people assumed they were insolvent and withdrew all their money.
This is what's going on right now to this day. Not just here in America either, everywhere in the world.
Pretty soon, even banks that had nothing to do with the guy were going under, and so the fearful bankers of America turned to the only man with the power to save them, J.P. Morgan. Back then, John Morgan was the king of Wall Street, and even today the bank he created is the largest one in America. He wasn't the wealthiest man at the time, that title belonged to John Rockefeller, but Morgan was certainly the man everyone turned to when things got bad. In October 1907,
cool, right?
Morgan summoned
That's
the great
what's up.
bankers
That's
of the
cool
day
as shit.
to his office at 23 Wall Street. With the collective capital of America's big banks, Morgan arranged for the rescue of the healthy banks that were nevertheless near bankruptcy due to irrational fears. Virtually the same thing would happen a century later in 2008 when the government bailed out the banks, but this time it was happening entirely thanks to private individuals like John Morgan. Once the panic was contained, it became clear to everyone that a central bank was necessary, and Congress immediately passed legislation to create one. However, that was pretty much the only thing everyone agreed on. The actual details of how it would work sparked long and fierce debates that halted any progress.
Alright. Now that's the part I want y'all to see on that one. Now I'm about to move right into this one. Okay.
pre-war Germany did have a private central bank, but it was under strict control by the German government to keep inflation at reasonable levels and to make sure that all of the German economy was being properly funded, just like Putin did with their central bank about a month ago. Under government control by the German government, investment was guaranteed to internal economic development, and as a result, Germany had become a major manufacturing technological power. They were exporting products that Great Britain could not compete with. So in the media of the day, Germany was portrayed as the main opponent of World War I. And not just defeated, it was flattened. Now, following the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was ordered to pay the war costs of all the participating nations, even though Germany had not started that war. This amounted to 3 times the value of all of Germany itself. Germany's private central bank, to which the German government had gone deeply into debt to pay the cost of the wars, was allowed to break free of government control. That led to the massive inflation of the Weimar Republic, followed, permanently trapping the German people in endless debt. And money speculators were running rampant, and it led to these situations where you had literally a whole basket full of paper notes to get a loaf of bread. Now, when the Weimar Republic collapsed economically, it opened the door for the National Socialists to take power. Their first financial move was to issue their own state currency, which was not borrowed from private central banks. It was based on a unit of value, not a unit of debt. Freed from having to pay interest on the money in circulation, Germany blossomed and quickly began to rebuild its industry. It was an amazing transformation to see. The media called it the German miracle. Time magazine lionized Hitler for the amazing improvement of life for the German people and the explosion of German industry, and they even named him Time magazine's Man of the Year in 1938. And then once again, Germany's prosperity and freedom from a private central bank loaning the public currency at interest became a threat to other nations and other powers. I have a couple of quotes here from Winston Churchill that tells you what was really going through the minds of Europe in the years leading up to World War II. Quote, "Should Germany merchandise again," which means do business, "should Germany merchandise again in the next 50 years, we have led this war, World War I, in vain." That was Winston Churchill writing in the Times in 1919. Another quote, quote, "We will force this war upon Hitler if he wants it or not," end quote. Winston Churchill in a 1936 radio broadcast. Quote, "Germany becomes too powerful. We have to crush it," end quote. Winston Churchill in November 1936 speaking to U.S. General Robert Wood. Quote, "This war is an English war, and its goal is the destruction of Germany." Winston Churchill in autumn 1939 broadcast. It was all about economics and profitability. Now, Germany's state-issued value-based currency was also a direct threat to the wealth and power of the private central banks around the world. And as early as 1933, they started to organize a Churchill in autumn 1939 broadcast. So it was all about, end quote, Winston Churchill in November 1936,
Germany has become too powerful.
U.S. General Robert Wood. Quote, "This war is an English war, and its goal is the destruction of Germany." Winston Churchill in autumn 1939 broadcast. So it was all about economics and profitability. Now, Germany's state-issued value-based currency was also a direct threat to the wealth and power of the private central banks around the world. And as early as 1933, they started to organize a global boycott against Germany to strangle this upstart ruler who thought he could run his nation without a private central bank. Now, as had been the case in World War I, Great Britain and other nations threatened by Germany's economic power looked for an excuse to go to war. We could have, if we had intended so, prevented this war from breaking out without doing one shot, but we didn't want to. End quote. Winston Churchill to Harry Truman, March 1946. One more quote here. Quote, "Germany's unforgivable crime before World War II was its attempt to loosen its economy out of the world trade system and to build up an independent exchange system from which the world finance couldn't profit anymore. We butchered the wrong pig," end quote. Winston Churchill writing in his book, The Second World War. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he was trying to basically get the United States into the war against Nazi Germany to help out his good buddy Stalin, Roosevelt had the U.S. Navy attack German shipping in the North Atlantic, even though there was no state of war between Germany and the United States. Adolf Hitler refused to respond to the provocation. because he knew he did not want to go to war against the United States and its very powerful manufacturing resources. So that's when Roosevelt backed off and said, all right, let's get the back door to war with Germany by tricking Japan or goading Japan into attacking Pearl Harbor, act like that's the surprise attack, and we'll be off and running to big mistake number 2, to make the world safe for private central banking here.
So, with that being said, I love Christians. I love black people. I love Asians. I love all Asians of the continent of Asia. I love all Europeans on the continent of Europe. I love all Africans on the continent of Africa. I love all Americans in the continent of America. I love all religions. I love all people who are actually practicing their religions and have good intentions and good hearts. I love you, and I will never disrespect you and say that, you feel me, you don't have good intentions sometimes. When sometimes you've been tricked, sometimes you have to admit that. And with that being said, all the patriots, all the people who are Republicans, black, white, silver, gold, green, you feel me, all that shit, y'all motherfuckers gotta really start considering the fact that until you can't say you're a real patriot, you can't say you're a real Christian, you can't say you're a real religious person, real Buddhist, or anything like that, until we establish the fact that we have to eliminate we have to get rid of the system of the central reserve banking. We cannot support Switzerland and Britain no more. We cannot keep going along with that fucking paradigm at all. We cannot. It's gonna continue eating us alive. Black people, you will never prosper. Even if white people wanted to help. Even if the people who are not Democrats or Republicans, all these people who have good intentions, who want to actually help the planet, help you, help each other. Even if all these other races wanted to help black people, they couldn't until the fact that we get rid of the Central Reserve Bank, the Federal Reserve Banking, international Central Reserve Banking too, that international monetary foundation. It's gotta stop. These cycles have gotta stop, man. So this is trying to focus everybody back to the actual reality of what's happening right here. It's not like this is a election year and everything, but it's also every election year is an opportunity to build a new foundation. So we don't have to kill anybody. We don't have to destroy anybody. We don't have to do anything. We just have to say we don't want to be a part of, not only, we don't want to be a part of the Federal Reserve Bank or the Central Reserve Bank. We're going to create our own fucking currency and our own currency standards and values. And since it was illegal in the first place for us to even have a Federal Reserve Bank, all debts that are owed to the Federal Reserve Bank are void. That's all we have to establish. Those are the facts. If you're conscious and you live in America and you're an American, or if you understand what this land is and when they call it America in reality, then that's the actual focus of goal right now. They're going to try to distract you in every way possible away from the actual fact and goal. They're going to try to distract you with race, politics, like left and right, conservative, progressive, and all this shit, man. Come on, bro. Like, and deep down in our hearts, I understand that all these people might have good intentions, but even trying to filter the energy of something and filter the energy of something is not going to work. Just the same way that these motherfuckers back in the day created a whole new party, talking about the Republican Party out of nowhere, and that's just based off of, you feel me, finances and shit. It was an illusion the whole time. They talking about democracy and republican shit like that. That's just going back to the protection of property versus the protection of rights and the psychological mind of the masses, while this chosen leader of the oligarchy is in power or maintaining the orders of the Federal Reserve, what is allowed to. So I'm gonna get to this right here.
Title was going to get some people's attention. The
This is
global
under
elite
real.
secret
I
plan
used to
for
be
the next
subscribed to
financial
him.
crisis.
You wanna go fuck with
Now,
him? I'm gonna try, bro.
what are you saying about the global elites? Are they doing certain things before this crisis, as far as stockpiling cash, doing certain things with their trades, and are they doing this because they know better, or are they conspiring with each other? And what can we learn from what you know?
Right. Well, I don't think it's a conspiracy in the sense that there's, a small group of Illuminati wearing hooded robes sitting around a mahogany table like you're seeing a specter from a James Bond movie. It doesn't work that way.
But of course, you used to hang out with those Illuminati in Greenwich, Connecticut. We'll get to that later.
That's another story. So, but the way it does work, and I talked about this in the book. First of all, it's not a secret. We know who they are. It's Christine Lagarde, her first head of the IMF, her first deputy managing director, David Lipton. Professors like Larry Summers and Ken Rogoff at Harvard, public intellectuals here in the UK, Adair Turner, Anatol Koletsky, Mario Draghi, head of the European Central Bank. So it's a collection of central bankers, finance ministers, academics, think tankers, and public intellectuals, and several hundred of them around the world who collectively run the international monetary system, because they either run the central banks or the multilateral institutions, or they're in and out of finance ministries, or they have a lot of influence. So that's who they are.
They influence 90% of what happens,
or
more.
Exactly.
Okay. So there's no secret that it's some other guy.
We know who they are. Okay. So then what about the hooded robes part? And the answer is, they don't need that. You just said conspiracies fall apart, and they do. Conspiracies are kind of easy to spot most of the time. It's more the case that they're like-minded individuals. They don't need top-down organization because they all agree with each other. They all went to the same schools. They went to Oxford, Cambridge, MIT, Harvard, Chicago, Stanford, like 6 or 7 schools in the whole world. They all
Pay
went
attention
to them.
now.
In many
This
cases,
is the
they were each
important
other's
shit, bro. Not for you, not for your
thesis
not for your
advisors.
spirit to
Stanley
prosper, but
Fisher
for
was the
you to
vice chairman of
goddamn
the
be
Federal Reserve,
aware.
former MIT professor.
And
a little
don't let
older
them
than
take
the
you
rest.
off
He was
focus.
the,
These are the people. It's not no conspiracy.
Look,
just focus.
I know a lot of these guys. I mean, I kind of know where I speak.
Play it back.
As I say, I hung out with the 16 PhDs and the 2 Nobel Prize winners of long-term capital. Oxford, Cambridge, MIT, Harvard. Conspiracies are kind of easy to spot most of the time. It's more the case that they're like-minded individuals. They don't need top-down organization because they all agree with each other. They all went to the same schools. They went to Oxford, Cambridge, MIT, Harvard, Chicago, Stanford, like 6 or 7 schools in the whole world. They all went to them. In many cases, they were each other's PhD thesis advisors. Stanley Fisher is the vice chairman of the Federal Reserve, former MIT professor, a little older than the rest. He was
I'm my alumnus here.
Look, I know a lot of these guys. I mean, I kind of know where I speak. As I said, I hung out with the 16 PhDs and the 2 Nobel Prize winners of long-term capital. I shared an office with Myron Scholes for 6 years, so I know this milieu. But Stanley was the thesis advisor to a lot of the other central bankers. So they're not only like-minded, they taught each other. And they all learned the same thing. And it's all wrong. They're not uneducated. They're miseducated. In other words, the models that they have taught themselves, that they perpetuate and that they're teaching to the younger scholars, are at best obsolete and at worst dangerously flawed in ways that are setting up a system for
Y'all be like it. Y'all be actually taking these statistics serious, bro.
So
Y'all be taking these numbers serious as hell.
So they're in control. They're like-minded, so they don't need a lot of coordination because they all think alike. They've got badly flawed models, and they never see this coming. So are they trying to wreck the system? No, but they are wrecking the system through their own kind of ignorance and misapprehension of the statistical properties of risk. Meanwhile, they are smart enough to know what we're describing, which is that this is going to happen again. They can see it coming. They don't actually understand why, but they know that nothing got fixed in 2008. One way to think about this, Brian, is that the dynamics and the mathematics of a financial panic are exactly the same as the collapse of any complex system anywhere in the natural world. So earthquakes, volcanoes, forest fires, various phenomena, avalanches of this kind. They're not just metaphors. I mean, I use them as metaphors in writing, but they're not just metaphors. The dynamics are identical, but with one difference, which is in a man-made system, you can truncate it with policy. In a natural system, you cannot. So when an earthquake starts, what's an earthquake? An earthquake is a release of energy. That's how you define and measure an earthquake. When an earthquake starts, you can't stop it. Like, you can't stop an earthquake in the middle and say, time out. But if you could, imagine if you could, what would happen? That energy would be unreleased, but it would still be there. The pressure would be there building up. It just didn't get released that time. Now bring that over to the man-made systems. There, when the earthquake starts, when the release of energy starts, you can truncate it. So you have dominoes falling, boom, 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 boom. You know that the last one's going to fall unless they drop a steel wall between two dominoes. Now the domino hits when the next one doesn't fall. That's what they did in September of 2008.
Right.
They dropped a steel wall between Lehman Brothers and Morgan Stanley didn't fail, but because they guaranteed every bank deposit, money market fund, and currency swap in the world.
When they should have let it fail, or nature would have let it fail?
Well, they should have let it fail. Now, I don't think we should have allowed ourselves to go into something worse than the Great Depression. There was a solution on the table that they never pursued because of cronyism. See, now we're getting into the gangster side of it, the cronyism side. So what they should have,
juicy.
by executive order, and the legal authority was there, they could have nationalized all the big banks. Not permanently, because I'm not in favor of socialism, but temporarily nationalize them.
Cleaned them
What you do is you wipe out the equity. First of all, you rip out the bad assets, and you put them over here in trust for the American people. So it might take 20 years to sell them, but whenever we sell them, that money goes to you, the taxpayers. Over here, we now have a clean bank. Equity, you're wiped out. Bondholders, how big's the hole in the balance sheet? 20% haircut, 40% haircut, whatever it takes. Preferred stock, you're probably wiped out. Put the losses where they should be. Put the losses on the people who deserve it, which are the stakeholders in the institution. So now you get rid of the bad assets, you wipe out the equity, you now IPO a clean bank to raise new equity, and you start over with Citibank and Goldman, all these guys private, with new owners and clean balance sheets, and we can get the economy moving again. That is not what happened. What did they do? They took the TARP money. By the way, TARP was the greatest bait and switch in history because Hank Paulson, our Secretary of the Treasury, went to the Congress and said,
It's not hard,
I
y'all.
want this money so I can buy the bad assets from the banks. I want to strip out the bad
We
assets.
control
That's not what
reality.
he did. He took the money and gave it to the banks.
We
as
control
capital,
this shit.
and they kept the bad assets, which meant that when they recovered, the bankers got the profits, not the people. So this was cronyism as first. Nobody went to jail. None of the big banks failed, other than Bear Stearns.
Right.
So the big banks didn't.
He was
fail.
ex-banker.
Sorry.
Paulson was ex-banker, right?
Goldman.
Yeah, Goldman.
Yeah. So they bailed out their buddies. All these guys kept their jobs. They kept their funny baloney jobs. They got their $1 million bonuses. Their stock price came back. When things recovered, the profit didn't go to the taxpayers where it should have. It went to the banks. Everything about this was corrupt. But they could have done this nationalized, clean up, re-IPO, privatize, and kind of move on with the clean bank.
Okay, so that was the other option.
That was the other option. It was not done.
Continue watching this fascinating conversation for
Man,
free
this
by
shit
clicking
over
on the
with,
link
bro.
below to visit our
I'm
website.
about to end this shit on y'all niggas, but I just want to play one more little clip. It's gonna be the last little one. I gotta end it off with the power of a black, beautiful woman. Okay. This is gonna break this shit down because people always talk about working and shit like that. They don't even understand it. They don't even understand number. They don't understand math. They don't understand literature. They don't understand law. They don't even understand maritime law. They don't understand none of this stuff. And you trying to sit right here and tell me that you should have the right. You have the right to vote, and then once again, out of nowhere, you have the right to tell somebody that, you feel me? Oh yeah, the reason why you're failing in life is not because of the system. It's because of you, nigga. Okay, somebody in certain instance, yeah. But most of the time, 9 times out of 10, the system is feeding off of the people. It has to feed off of one group. I keep telling y'all that. That's how government works. It's the same. It's the same ideology, but it's operated in different ways. Basically based off of fucking the location and the landmass that you operate on. But with that being said, we can't blame each other talking about, oh yeah, shit, fucking Black Lives Matter is the fucking problem, they're terrorists. And then say, oh yeah, Donald Trump is all this shit. You're getting swept up under the same fucking ideology, and you're saying all the shit that these bankers want you to say. They want they whole narrative for the fucking they wasn't even planning on using the terrorist shit past 2025, nigga. But if the American people start trying to use that shit as weapons against each other, that shit is ignorant, nigga. There is no such thing as a fucking terrorist. There is no such thing as a terrorist. The idea of a terrorist all based off fucking the Federal Reserve Bank being fucking, they write the book. They write the book and then y'all motherfuckers literally goddamn operate that shit. They control the finances, so they control what operations get fucking manifested in a society at what speed and what progress rate and what fucking will survive and won't survive, basically. All the shit you think is government, right? It's all just it's like a fucking dress for an invisible guy, a person that just has a head, and a head has one eye on it, nigga. So don't be blaming poor white people, poor black people, poor people for anything or any situation they in, no matter where you at in life. You feel me? Because don't be making class systems and all that other shit up. The only reason we have all that shit is because of the fucking fact that we're relying on a system that is flawed.
Our Congress has so infrequent.
Valerie is the director of our program on race, ethnicity, and the economy.
This podcast is called
really
Economic Policy Institute.
Because
subscribe to them. I love this shit, bro. It's so fire, bro. Like,
especially
y'all gotta
today,
go check this shit
especially under an administration that has made race such a central issue in this country. Often in economic discussions, race is thought of as an afterthought and as almost a social and cultural factor that should be looked at outside of the economic realm. And Valerie has been an important voice in making sure.
I'm gonna probably think I'm ghetto as hell. Fuck that shit. I mean, I tried to, but I want y'all to listen to it at least.
Sure that race is actually central to the economic debate, and so it's my pleasure to have you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
So, I wanted to start by telling one of the stories that I've learned personally from you and from your work and the work of others, which is, a not so pleasant story about the direction of our economy when it comes to the gaps in wealth and income between various race groups. I think a lot of Americans tend to think of the American history as a sort of progression toward improvement and positivity, and particularly racial issues as kind of ebbing over time. And many people envision the wealth gap as narrowing over time. And in fact, some of the data show that it's not happening, and in fact the trend may be moving in the other direction. Can you talk a little bit about what aspects of the economy strike you the most as kind of potentially red flags in that sense, and some of the data that startles you the most?
Sure. I think when we start to look at economic outcomes in the United States and we consider how those outcomes look differently for different racial and ethnic groups, I think the most general statement that I can make is that those racial economic disparities are large and they're persistent. It's very difficult to identify a certain statistic, whether it be wages, whether it be the unemployment rate, net worth, income, poverty, where there is not a clear disparity based on race and ethnicity. And in particular, when we look at the differences between Black Americans and white Americans, we see huge gaps. Those are, in a lot of senses, sort of the two ends of the pole. We know that a lot of the statistics for Asian Americans, actually show slightly better outcomes than whites. But in terms of the broader history of race and economics in this country, really the long-standing differences between blacks and whites. When we talk about the unemployment rate in particular, we know that the Black unemployment rate is almost always double the white unemployment rate. When we look at the disparity in wages, we have seen periods where there have been improvements in what we call the wage gap, the difference between what blacks and whites earn. But in more recent years, really in the last 20 years or so, we've started to see those differences get larger. When, as you said before, we'd expect to see things improving as we're progressing. And as a lot of people like to say, we've had a Black president. Certainly things are getting better in this country. But the economic data don't bear that out.
I just want y'all to see how beautiful.
Can you just talk a little bit about the role of
hold on.
home ownership in
I almost turned that shit around at the wrong time.
And how different policies have kind of
accentuated, if not caused, the wealth gap over time?
Well, the way that we measure wealth is typically by net worth. That's the difference between the total value of your assets, the total value of your liabilities or your debts. And so in this country, the largest single asset that most people get an opportunity to own is a home. So when we look at differences in home ownership rates, they really tell us a lot about the wealth gap in this country. One, there's a significant difference in home ownership rates between blacks and whites in this country. But not only that, even when we're comparing homeowners, there's differences in equity. There's differences in the value of those homes based on where those homes are located and what the demographics of the neighborhood are. And when we consider that, that is something that can be traced historically to policy in this country. The fact that we went through a period of redlining, where there were only certain communities where African Americans could live, and in those communities at a point in time, they actually could not get mortgages. When we consider policies coming out of the war and the fact that there was this push to make home ownership more affordable, VA loans, the GI Bill, those sorts of things, that actually opened doors of opportunity for whites to be able to purchase homes and build what we consider a middle-class lifestyle. But African Americans were often excluded from those opportunities. So when we consider those policies and we sort of put that next to the statistics that we see today in terms of the disparity in home ownership, I believe the difference now, the average, that white home ownership rate is about 72, 75%, somewhere in there. For African Americans, is right around 40%. So that's a significant difference. But then again, I said, on top of that, when we consider the difference in the value of homes, we consider the effect that the financial crisis and the Great Recession had on a significant number of foreclosures among African American families, not to mention the fact that there was predatory subprime lending that, again, even if you did get a mortgage, were able to purchase a home, the terms of that loan often were predatory, so it stripped any wealth that a family may have had an opportunity to build.
The most striking detail that I remember reading about predatory lending in black communities in particular was that I can't remember the name, which investment bank, but a major investment bank had an emerging markets unit targeting black communities in the United States. In other words, they were literally thinking of inner cities as developing countries to be, to be milked out of that last little bit of juice.
I wonder which bank that was.
Well, so
was it the one that?
Can you talk about the role of education? Because that's another story that, another myth, if you will, that you've helped kind of push back against. The notion that the wage and wealth gap is really just due to an education gap, and as soon as you close that education gap, we're going to get sort of more equal outcomes.
Yeah, that whole relationship is sort of interesting because there are two things to keep in mind. One, we know that with higher levels of education, you do earn higher wages. You do have a lower unemployment rate. There are certain opportunities that open up with more education. And so education is effective and important when we consider mobility and being able to ascend the economic scale. However, what we find is that education does not eliminate or even narrow, in many cases, the racial disparity, the difference between whites and blacks, even at a given level of education. We see this in the unemployment rate, that even among college graduates, black college graduates are going to have a higher unemployment rate than white college graduates. And certainly when we look at what's happened with the wage gap in particular, over the last 40 years or so, the wage gap has actually grown the most among college graduates. And that is sort of counterintuitive to what we think should be happening. So what we find is that when we look over the longer span of history, say over the last 50 years, we see significant gains in educational attainment among African Americans, both in terms of people completing high school. There are actually very few folks now who are not high school graduates, as well as the share who have a college degree. So given those gains, we would expect to see some more narrowing and closing of those economic gaps. I mentioned unemployment and wages in particular, but wealth as well. Colleagues of mine, Sandy Darity and Derek Hamilton, have done work specifically looking at the role of education in closing the wealth gap, because they've done tons of research on the wealth gap. And they find similar findings there that I see with wages, that even with higher levels of education, those differences between races are not narrowing. And in fact, you find that African Americans who have a college education actually have less wealth than whites without even a high school diploma.
And there was a student debt factor differential in that dynamic as well, right? Where I've read that black students end up burdened with more loans on average than white students. Is that?
Yes, that is a fact as well, because we mentioned before, net worth considers your assets as well as
right.
Your
it ain't right.
So yes, student debt in particular, and the fact that as a country we have not continued to invest in public education so that students don't have to take out those loans says a lot. I think another thing that says is that, when people want to make the argument that, well, you should get more education and that will improve your outcomes. I think the fact that there's a significant amount of debt among African American college graduates shows that people are making the effort to do what they think they should do to be able to have a decent standard of living. But again, because our policies aren't really working for the typical or average American family, we find these disparities that just sort of replicate differences that we know already exist in terms of wealth gaps and income gaps, wage gaps, and unemployment gaps, and we can go on down the line.
Could you talk a little bit about the kinds of the policy direction that the country is headed in now, and the kinds of policies that might be able to begin to ameliorate disparities as sort of vast and as deeply embedded in our country as they are? Of course, there's a range of things that we talk about at EPI. We talk about Fed policy. It seems like Fed officials are increasingly listening to the notion that easy monetary policy can actually help lower and middle income individuals maybe re-enter the labor force and gain higher wages, etc. But there's also the other range of policies, including raising the minimum wage and sort of kind of more pro-worker policies generally. And could you talk about those and what policies could be specifically targeted, to the racial issue itself?
So, you mentioned a couple of the policies that are important on improving outcomes, absolutely. So in terms of reducing unemployment rates, we know that the Fed policy is important in terms of their willingness to keep interest rates low and allowing the unemployment rate to continue to fall. Because the African American unemployment rate is typically double the white rate, nearly double the average rate. The lower that average number goes, we know that those who are typically left out of opportunities have more of a chance of getting employment. Also, we know that as the unemployment rate gets lower, there's a greater chance for wage growth. We haven't seen as much of that in this round, but again, it's the best thing to do, I think, is to leave those rates lower. The other things that we can do are more specific to, for example, wages. We talk about raising the minimum wage. That's an interesting one because, we don't necessarily expect that raising the minimum wage is going to make people wealthy. However, the importance of that is our Congress has so infrequently raised the minimum wage that it is actually not kept up with rising cost of living. So in raising the minimum wage, we're just sort of playing catch up with inflation. But the other thing that's important with that is we see that African Americans are more likely to be in the kinds of jobs that get paid a minimum wage. So when that gets increased, then you have a disproportionate benefit for African Americans. But the other reason that policy is important is in terms of regional differences in state policy. States and localities can set a minimum wage that is higher than a federal minimum wage. But it just so happens that in the region of the country and in states that have a larger share of the Black population, this is done less or more infrequently than it is in other places. So unless...
That's all I'm doing, people do, man. So with that being said, these banks and the banking system have to be out of control. And unless any politician is telling me that they're going to take control, give the control of our banking system to the public, unless we're doing that shit, then they're not really about the truth. They're not really good. They don't really have good intentions. And I hate to break it to anybody. And we cannot support them. We can only support somebody who's going to put an end to the central reserve banking and give the power of the bank to the public of all the citizens and sovereign people of this land. And the rest of the shit, we can negotiate some of that shit, but the terms of all that shit has to come back to that. That's it. Because nothing is going to change until then. It's just going to be cycles of the same bullshit. We cannot keep sending our kids to war to go basically destroy people that don't want to be they don't want to have central reserve banking. That's what we're doing. Don't let these people, we have to think. We have to love each other. We have to appreciate each other. You feel me? With that being said, if you don't love me and you don't appreciate me, I understand you don't know me and I don't know you. So with that being said, you might think everything I'm saying is basically like malintentions. And if you do, cancel that right now. Thank you.